Imagine for a moment that you are one of the greatest emperors the world has ever seen. Your empire stretches from the mountains of Afghanistan to the coasts of Bangladesh. Vaster and wealthier than the domain of your contemporary, the Egyptian pharaoh Ptolemy. You rule over a population of millions, your word is law. And your capital, Pataliputra, is a city of legendary opulence with its grand palaces and wooden walls that awe even foreign ambassadors. Now imagine that less than 2,000 years after your death, no one remembers your name. It is as if history has erased you completely. That is the fate that befell Ashoka the Great. For nearly 500 years, he was a ghost. A forgotten king mentioned only in vague, fantastical legends that scholars dismissed as myths. His grand empire had crumbled. His magnificent palaces had rotted away. And the very script his proclamations were written in had become a dead language, its meaning lost to time. The story of his rediscovery sounds like something from an Indiana Jones film. In the 1830s, a British scholar named James Prinsep was in India, wrestling with a frustrating puzzle. All across the subcontinent from Delhi to Odisha, British officers and surveyors were finding strange pillars and rock carvings covered in an unknown script. It was elegant, precise, and utterly indecipherable. For years, Prinsep and others tried to crack the code. They stared at the strange letters, comparing them, analyzing them, getting nowhere. It was one of the greatest cryptographic challenges in history. But in 1837, Prinsep had his eureka moment. He managed to decipher the Brahmi script, and the rocks began to speak. What they revealed was astonishing. The inscriptions weren't religious hymns or dry records of donations. They were the personal edicts of a king who called himself Devanampiya Piyadasi, which means beloved of the gods, and he who regards everyone with affection. And in one crucial edict, the 13th major rock edict, this king tells us his name. But before we get to that name and the story that came with it, we have to understand who this king was before he became beloved of the gods. And the picture history paints of his early life is not a pretty one. The man who would be remembered as a paragon of peace began his career as a ruthless prince, an ambitious general, and a tyrant so cruel he allegedly built a personal hell on earth. This is the story of Ashoka, the fierce and forgotten emperor who conquered an empire, only to be conquered by a single battlefield. We begin not with his birth, but with his second birth, his rediscovery in the 19th century, because without that moment, he would still be a whisper in the wind. Now let's go back to the beginning, to the bloody ground where the old Ashoka died.
To understand Ashoka's transformation, we first have to understand the world that made him. He was born around 304 BCE, the grandson of Chandragupta Maurya, the man who founded the dynasty. Chandragupta, guided by the cunning political strategist Chanakya, author of the ancient text on statecraft known as the Arthashastra, had unified a fractured India and created the subcontinent's first great empire. This was a world where power was won through strength, cunning, and often sheer ruthlessness. Ashoka's father was Bindusara, the second emperor, and young Ashoka was not the favorite son. In fact, he was reportedly disliked by his father, who favored his older brother, Susima, the heir apparent. Growing up in the shadow of a preferred sibling, Ashoka was a prince with everything to prove. He was highly educated, trained in martial arts, and schooled in the cold, pragmatic philosophies of the Arthashastra, which taught that the ends justified the means. As a young man, he was sent to quell a rebellion in the important city of Taxila. He succeeded, showing early signs of military and administrative skill. His father then posted him to the wealthy commercial center of Ujjain. It was there that a pivotal yet quiet event occurred. He fell in love with a woman named Devi, the daughter of a local merchant. This is where the story gets a little hazy, because our main sources for Ashoka's life are Buddhist legends. And in these stories, Devi is often portrayed as a Buddhist. It's possible she was the one who first introduced Ashoka to the teachings of the Buddha, planting a seed that wouldn't bloom for many years. But for now, Ashoka was a prince focused on ambition. He and Devi had 2 children, a son named Mahinda and a daughter named Sangamita. But she remained in Ujjain, never becoming his queen in the capital. Meanwhile, back in Pataliputra, the political drama was reaching its climax. King Bindusara fell gravely ill. Susima, the heir, was away on a military campaign. The court ministers who favored Ashoka moved quickly. They orchestrated Ashoka's return to the capital, and upon his father's death, he seized the throne. The ascension was brutal. According to some legends, Ashoka executed his elder brother, Susima, by having him thrown into a charcoal pit, a horrifyingly painful death. Other legends, eager to paint his pre-conversion life as utterly wicked, claim he killed 99 of his own brothers to secure the throne. Scholars believe this is an exaggeration. He likely killed only a couple of rivals. But the symbolism is clear. Ashoka was willing to do whatever it took to wear the crown. Now, with absolute power, the new emperor revealed a darker side. He became known for his senseless cruelty. He built a notorious prison in Pataliputra, which people called Ashoka's Hell. It was a place of grotesque torture, designed for the sadistic pleasure of the king. He hunted for sport, feasted on meat, and ruled with an iron fist. He was everything a traditional conquering king was expected to be: fierce, unforgiving, and utterly without mercy. The empire trembled under his rule. He had passed every test of power, and now he looked to expand his dominion. His gaze fell upon a prosperous and fiercely independent kingdom on the eastern coast of India, Kalinga. And it was there, 8 years into his reign, that the world and Ashoka himself would change forever.
The Kalinga campaign, launched around 261 BCE, was not supposed to be different from any other. It was a wealthy coastal kingdom, roughly corresponding to modern-day Odisha, with a powerful army, including a formidable force of 60,000 infantry, 1,000 cavalry, and 700 war elephants. Ashoka, confident in his vast military machine, marched east to bring it under Mauryan control. But the Kalingans fought with a desperate ferocity that the emperor had not anticipated. They weren't just fighting for their king, but for their freedom, their families, and their way of life. The war was brutal, prolonged, and bloody beyond measure. When it was finally over, Ashoka had won. Kalinga was annexed to his empire, but victory came at a horrifying price. According to his own words, carved in stone for all posterity, the casualty figures were staggering. In his 13th major rock edict, Ashoka himself states, 150,000 persons were carried away captive. 100,000 were slain, and many times that number died. Think about that, 100,000 dead on the battlefield. Another 150,000 torn from their homes, their families shattered, their futures destroyed. And countless more, perhaps hundreds of thousands, succumbing to the famine and disease that always followed in the wake of such a devastating conflict. The edict describes the scene with chilling clarity. It wasn't just the soldiers who suffered. Ashoka writes of the slaughter, death, and deportation of the people as being extremely grievous. He speaks of the suffering inflicted on the Brahmins and ascetics, on the householders, on the friends and families of the fallen. He realized that even those who survived the sword were afflicted by the misfortunes of their friends, acquaintances, colleagues, and relatives. Legend has it that after the battle was over, Ashoka walked alone across the battlefield of Kalinga. He had seen war before, but never like this. The scale of the carnage was unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. The silence of the dead was broken only by the wails of the wounded and the grieving. He saw the burned homes, the charred corpses, the fields turned into graveyards. He saw the empty eyes of a child sitting beside the body of its mother. He saw the old and the weak, left to die with no one to care for them. This was not a victory. This was an abomination. Everything he had been taught, everything he had believed about power and conquest, suddenly felt hollow and meaningless. The Arthashastra had taught him how to win an empire, but it offered no solace for what he felt now. A profound, soul-crushing remorse. In that moment, the title he would later take for himself, Beloved of the Gods, must have seemed like a cruel joke. What kind of gods would smile upon this? The 13th edict doesn't just record facts. It records a broken heart. It says, immediately after the Kalingas had been conquered, King Ashoka became intensely devoted to the study of Dharma, to the love of Dharma, and to the inculcation of Dharma. And then comes the most crucial line. The beloved of the gods, conqueror of the Kalingas, is moved to remorse now. The ruthless emperor, the killer of his own brothers, the man who delighted in a torture chamber, had been broken by the scale of his own violence. He looked upon the fruits of his ambition and found them rotten. He realized that military conquest, victory by the sword, was a hollow and terrible thing. He vowed then and there to never wage another war of conquest. He announced that henceforth, his only conquest would be a conquest by Dharma, a moral conquest, one not by killing, but by teaching and example. The old Ashoka died on the blood-soaked fields of Kalinga. What rose from that carnage was an emperor the world had never seen before. The change in Ashoka was not a simple overnight conversion to Buddhism. It was a profound and total transformation of his entire being, his policies, and his vision for his empire. He embraced the teachings of the Buddha, but his personal faith became the foundation for a new public philosophy he called Dhamma. This wasn't just a religion. It was a comprehensive ethical code for living, a blueprint for a just and compassionate society. Dhamma was based on principles of nonviolence, tolerance, and respect for all life. And Ashoka, in a move unprecedented for an absolute monarch, decided to share his new vision with every single one of his subjects. He didn't just issue decrees from his palace. He had his message carved into the very landscape of India. These are the edicts of Ashoka. 33 inscriptions on pillars and rock faces, written not in the courtly Sanskrit, but in the common people's language, Prakrit, using the Brahmi script. They are the world's first surviving political documents written from the perspective of the ruled, not just the ruler. They are not boasts of power, but confessions of past sins and promises for a better future. What do these edicts tell us? First, they show a king consumed by his new faith. In Major Rock Edict Dawai, he announces a ban on animal sacrifices and drastically reduces the meat consumed in the royal kitchen. Where once hundreds of thousands of animals were slaughtered daily for his feasts, he declares that now only a few are killed, and he hopes that even this will stop. Second, they reveal a king who saw himself as a father to his people, responsible for their well-being. Major Rock Edict Seru describes a remarkable program of public works. He orders wells to be dug and shade trees planted along the roads for the comfort of both man and beast. He establishes 2 types of medical treatment, for humans and for animals. This is believed to be the first time in history a government-provided universal health care, and it included animals. Third, Ashoka reinvented the very concept of royal tours. In Major Rock Edict VIII, he says that in the past, kings went on pleasure tours to hunt and be entertained. He replaced these with Dhamma tours. Instead of hunting, he would visit villages, instructing the people in ethical living, discussing Dhamma with them, and giving gifts to the aged and the poor. But perhaps the most radical changes were in his policy of religious tolerance. In an age where kings often imposed their own gods on conquered peoples, Ashoka did the opposite. In Major Rock Edict VII, he declares, "The beloved of the gods, King Piyadasi, desires that all religions should reside everywhere, for all of them desire self-control and purity of heart." He didn't just tolerate other faiths, he actively protected them. He created a new class of officers, the Dharma Mahamatras, whose job was to promote Dhamma and to look after the welfare of all religious sects, including the Brahmins, Jains, and Ajivikas. His ideal of conquest by Dharma is laid out most powerfully in the very same 13th edict that described the Kalinga horror. He declares that the only true conquest is the conquest of hearts through righteousness. He hopes that his children and grandchildren will not seek new military victories, but will instead find their pleasure in morality. He even reaches out to the powerful Hellenistic kings of the West, Antiochus of Syria, Ptolemy of Egypt, Antigonus of Macedon, expressing his wish that they too might follow the path of Dhamma. This was a complete 180-degree turn from everything an ancient emperor was supposed to be. He had traded the sword for the edict and the throne for a life of service. But how did this radical experiment in governing with love and compassion actually work in practice? Ashoka's reign after Kalinga was not one of a weak, retiring monk, but of an energetic and capable administrator who used the full power of his empire to spread a message of peace. He proved that Dhamma was not just a personal philosophy, but a workable system of governance. He made himself astonishingly accessible. In Major Rock Edict VI, he declares that he can be interrupted at any time, whether he is eating in his chambers or even in the royal harem, with reports on the affairs of the people. He states, "I must attend to the affairs of the people wherever I am." Imagine the most powerful man in the world insisting that reporters be posted at his door to keep him informed of public business at all hours. His commitment to nonviolence was absolute. In his pillar edicts, we see an almost unbelievable attention to detail. He lists dozens of animals that are protected from slaughter, including parrots, geese, bats, ants, tortoises, and rhinoceroses. He bans the killing of female animals that are pregnant or in milk. He forbids the castration of cocks and the burning of forests to kill living creatures. He even limits the number of days on which fish can be sold, creating a calendar of no-kill days. It was an unprecedented law code for environmental protection and animal rights. But Ashoka's vision extended far beyond the borders of his own empire. He is famously credited with transforming Buddhism from a small sect into a world religion. According to Sri Lankan Buddhist tradition, he convened the Third Buddhist Council in Pataliputra to purify the Sangha, the Buddhist monastic order, from corruption and debate. Then he did something extraordinary. He sent out missionaries, not to conquer, but to share. He dispatched revered monks and nuns to 9 different destinations, spreading the Buddha's message across the known world. He sent his own son, Mahinda, and his daughter, Sangamita, the children he had with Devi so many years ago in Ujjain, to the island of Sri Lanka. They carried with them a sapling of the very Bodhi tree under which the Buddha attained enlightenment. That tree still grows in Sri Lanka today, making it the oldest continuously documented tree in the world. Other missions went to the Himalayan region, to the lands of the Jonas, the Greeks in Bactria, and even westward to the Hellenistic kingdoms. This was a completely new kind of foreign policy. Not an empire of territory, but an empire of ideas. He was more interested in winning hearts and minds than in collecting tribute. Yet even this transformed emperor was not naive. In his 13th edict, after renouncing war, he makes a telling statement. He addresses the forest peoples, the tribal communities living within his domain. He asks them to adopt the path of Dhamma. But he also reminds them that he exercises the power to punish, despite his repentance. He understood that while he had personally renounced violence, a state must have order. It was a realistic touch from a man who had once been the most ruthless general of his age. For nearly 30 years, Ashoka ruled this vast, diverse, and peaceful empire. He created a golden age of stability, prosperity, and social harmony. He had found a way to wield power, not for personal glory, but for the common good. But all empires, no matter how great, eventually fall, and Ashoka knew it. As he grew old, his thoughts turned to the future and to his legacy. A legacy he tried to secure, not through walls and weapons, but through the enduring power of his words carved in stone. Ashoka the Great died in 232 BCE after ruling for nearly 4 decades. The empire he had held together began to fray almost immediately. His successors lacked his vision and his personal authority. Within 50 years of his death, the mighty Maurya Empire had collapsed. Splintering back into smaller kingdoms, the great pillars fell into disrepair, toppled by time and nature. The Brahmi script was forgotten. The magnificent capital of Pataliputra, with its grand palaces, rotted away. Its wooden structures, no match for the Indian climate. The name Ashoka was lost. He became a footnote in the lists of kings in the Puranas, a vaguely remembered figure of legend. The world moved on, and there, for nearly 2 millennia, the story might have ended. Ashoka would have remained a cautionary tale, a name on a forgotten list. But history, as it sometimes does, had other plans. The stones refused to stay silent. In the 1830s, as we began, a British scholar named James Prinsep, working with the fragments of rock and copies of inscriptions sent to him from across India, finally cracked the code. He deciphered the Brahmi script and, for the first time in 1,500 years, read the words of the king who called himself beloved of the gods. The world was stunned. Here was a voice from antiquity, speaking not of conquest and glory, but of remorse, tolerance, and the welfare of all beings. The legend had become history. The ghost had a name, Ashoka. Since that rediscovery, Ashoka's legacy has only grown. It is woven into the very fabric of modern India. When India became an independent nation in 1947, it needed symbols that reflected its ancient heritage and its new democratic values. It found them in Ashoka. The national emblem of India, printed on every passport and government document, is an adaptation of the lion capital of Ashoka, the magnificent 4-lion pillar he erected at Sarnath. The wheel on the center of the Indian national flag, the Ashoka Chakra, is the wheel of law, that crowned that same pillar. It represents the eternal wheel of righteousness, the very Dhamma Ashoka spent his life promoting. His story continues to resonate because it speaks to a universal human truth, the possibility of redemption. Ashoka was not born a saint. He was a man of immense flaws, an ambitious prince, a ruthless killer, a tyrant. But when confronted with the full horrifying consequences of his actions, he did not turn away. He looked, he felt, and he changed. He had the courage to admit he was wrong and the power to build a new world based on that realization. He was the first and perhaps the only emperor in history to renounce war after winning one. In a world still torn by conflict, his message of peace, tolerance, and compassion for all living things is as powerful and necessary as it was 300 years ago. He conquered an empire of blood and iron, but he chose to be remembered for building an empire of the heart. And that is why, centuries after his own empire turned to dust, the story of Ashoka the Great lives on.